Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So I guess where I'm at with this project on the idea is to talk about improvisation in oral skills and theory classrooms. I have some ideas. I'm very much where Scott was at with his project in that I've done some improvisation, but I'm just thinking of doing a lot more. And so I've been reading various resources on it, thinking about it, and thought this would be a great opportunity to see what other people are doing and to share some ideas and see how they sound like, and maybe also how they sound. So, you know, I said I would do a position paper, and I'm improvising here because I'm not sure whether to read this or not. I don't think I particularly need to. I mean, I think the basic thing, I think improvisation can be really powerful and really important, and I don't think we do enough of it. I don't think I do enough of it. I do some of it, but I think it's something that we could all do more of. It's a funny thing, because I think what we do in the class and what we do with improvisation obviously relates a lot to what our prior experiences as musicians. So if you're comfortable improvising, you're probably going to be comfortable doing this in the class. And so that's an issue to think through probably for us as a group, and each of us and together. But this also has to do with, I'm going to be in a position of supervising TAs who are going to be doing all skills classes, and I want them to do improvisation, and I'll need to see where they're at and then see how I can also work with them to increase their comfort level with improvisation. My own kind of background, I don't have a jazz background. I guess I started improvising in college, just playing around, and I just really still love to do it. I improvise on my flute, I improvise with the piano, and I just feel like it's a very freeing and nice way to engage musically. And I do think it's a really important way to take theory concepts and make them operational, so that it's really something, especially if students are bringing in their instruments into class, they can just, you know, play things, and it becomes, especially if you're having to think through things in the moment, and if the activities are set up in such a way that you can think through things in the moment, then it becomes very operational. So it's really useful. So a couple of things to maybe just issues to think about. One again, in the mode of advocacy, I think it can be very helpful. You know, we think a lot about model composition, and often compositions that people come up with, it feels to me, are not that interesting, and it's usually because they don't have that much experience just playing around. And so improvisation is about play, and if they can play, then the compositions also end up being more varied, more interesting. So I think it's useful for that. A couple of the texts that I've been looking at, maybe I'll just mention them now. I don't know, if there's other resources that I haven't, I'm sure there are, but this book is called From Sight to Sound by Nicole Brockman. So this is very much, it's called Improvisational Games for Classical Musicians. So it's very much a kind of classical orientation towards improvisation. What can you do in a classical context? Whereas, and these are listed on the references. Ed Sarath, I don't know, Sarath, did you come from Michigan?
I never studied.
Right. So he's developed a course at Michigan in improvisation, and he claims to do something that's he calls it trans-stylistic or something like that. But his background is in jazz, and so the opening exercises in the first book are really some wonderful exercises in kind of that's not directed towards any particular style or genre. But then as you get into the book, it's much more jazz oriented, which is fine, but it depends what you want to do. You have to think about what you want to do with improvisation. So these are two resources that I've looked at. They have lots of, good exercises, and you can try a few of them. The third one that I've been looking at is just this oral skills textbook that we're going to start to work with by Matthew Sheftel and Evan Jones. And, it's actually, the subtitle is actually a comprehensive approach to sight singing, ear training, harmony, and improvisation. So they do have a lot on improvisation here, working through this, I felt like a lot of the things was kind of just like do this, but they didn't really give you enough, either as an instructor or as a student, how to get there. So that's where I think some texts are quite nice. Some other things to think about more generally. Obviously, if you're working with a class, there's going to be students with different levels of comfort, and you have to create a space in which a non-judgmental space, essentially, where whatever you do is good, right? Because you're doing it. That's really, I think, really important, and just to be thinking about how to do that. Thinking about, then also to think about the range of possibilities with improvisation, whether it's group improvisation, individual, what the constraints are, how you take a given kind of, I keep thinking the word exercise, but I'd rather use activity or game, how you take it and then do it in one form and then vary it in another form and keep developing the same kind of thing over time is something just to think about that I've been thinking about. How to develop flexibility and freedom in improvisation, and that feeling which is so beautiful of thinking in the moment. You don't know what's going to happen next. That's not something that happens straight away, especially if people are a little bit more inhibited. They're going to kind of play, they're going to play something, and I don't know, it's something they haven't, it's kind of happened already, and it's not kind of happening in the moment somehow. So how to develop that, I don't know. When to use voices and when to use instruments, so that's something else to think about. And then how to model improvisation for students and how to develop one's own skills or work with TAs who don't have as much experience with improvisation. So, one of the things that I thought might be interesting is if we could just go along, and I'd be really curious to hear what each of you do or don't do with improvisation in the classroom, what your experiences. Would that be okay? Can you do that?
Oh, sure. I haven't done a ton with it. Where I teach at Oregon, the theory and oral skills and keyboard skills are all separate classes taught by different people. So whenever, I feel like this is usually kind of an oral skills type activity. So whenever I've taught oral skills, we've tried to do some improv here and there. I found that a lot of students, especially second year students who haven't done improv in first year, kind of like, whoa, I don't know about this, and it makes it hard as a teacher to try and like get them on board and get them comfortable. And so that's been my, as a teacher, kind of barrier to entry, is getting them on board. And I've tried, I'll do something and it'll turn out really badly, and I'll be like, see, it's fine, and they're like, so, but just as far as like general, I've done a lot of improv with rhythm. And getting them just to like do rhythms and then insert something in and kind of get this whole like class groove going,
right.
And just kind of groove making. And I've been really interested. It's an article on engaging students. I don't remember which one it is, but the idea of you have like this groove rhythm, and then you can start putting pitch on top of it, and then that pitch becomes improv. And by pairing the pitch with the rhythm, you have two improv streams going. I've always thought that sounded really cool, but I haven't personally done it.
Jamie and I do some fun things as well, where we just started teaching. We started teaching the freshmen the first semester, and we bring in a lot of different improvisation. We have improvised species kind of one, like melodic lines, singing melodic lines over like an ostinato of some kind.
Right.
They sing or we play something more complicated. We have an improvised call and response for rhythm.
So any of these, I don't know. So for example, with the ostinato, is it kind of one student at a time going around, or is it?
We have to break up into pairs just to practice. So and oftentimes it's sort of harmony based. So like do, so. Little things like that where they're like, yeah, and actually the person who's improvising is cueing the harmonies and conducting. That's one of the hardest things that they do. They have to do the self-patch as well as sing, as well as conduct, as well as cue. And some students are like, ah! But it's fun. I mean, and we do it. We try to try to create an environment where like, if you're singing the note, like you're doing it right, like, that's boring after like, 5 digits. Isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, this is really nice, but one of the things I've been thinking about also is free rhythm improvisation versus improvisation that has a beat. Once you introduce a beat and a meter, it's harder.
It is. It's much more structured. Yeah, absolutely.
But it forces them to think ahead, so that the idea has to be in the cue,
Right.
then be executed.
Right.
Improvisation has always been something I've been very interested in integrating pedagogically. When I was working at the University of Michigan, I knew about Sarah, and I had a couple of casual conversations with him. I was very interested in what he was doing. But it's not something I've ever ventured into incorporating myself. So it's something I'm very curious about.
So Phil gave an overview of some of the activities. On the harmony side of things, I've done some improvisations. Some projects, for instance, my students in the past have done improvised soundtracks for, like I call it, YouTube soundtracks. Some of those projects they've worked with art students, so they got like videos of the art students make, and then like figure out like what the feel of this video and improvise the soundtrack is. We'll generate some materials that they'll use, and we'll use those materials for
So that's a very open kind
This is
of,
very open.
right, that's good.
It just gets them just comfortable. I do it really early, so it gets them just thinking about making music. We'll just, like, we're studying intervals, we're studying chords. I say choose 2 intervals that you really like the sound of, and then play with them in different ways. So just bringing them into contact, so it's not just ideas on the board. I also do this approach that I call inverted analysis. So instead of like looking at a score, I might put, for instance, like a baseline up. And then I'll say, let's improvise some possible chord progressions. And then we'll see how close our improvisations get to what the composer actually did. So then they end up approaching the score already with a set of possibilities. So it depends also how like broadly you define improvisation. I think of improv as just like making music on the spot, right, without revision, without like, thinking it. So anyway, there's
Just also your cadenza.
yeah, so I have the students improvise cadenzas, they create a harmonic structure.
I take the last chapter of that CPD file, Fantasia.
Mhm.
You guys know this awesome this description of these chord progressions, and it makes them more and more complicated, more and more modulatory.
Right.
And it says like, you need to tease it out this way, you need to tease it out this way, you need to tease it out this way. So it's this, I always think of it as like message in a bottle.
Right.
Like, like if you have an understanding of harmony, this is what you would expect to do that from. You would play everywhere. Instruments as well.
Yeah. We can continue going around. I don't know, what do we want to, does someone want to kind of take notes on some of the ideas that are coming up here so we can get a joint research?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, you want.
Is that okay? Would you mind taking notes?
Yeah, and I'll tweet out the link and we'll put it on the homepage so everyone else can.
We've got some tweets going too.
Okay.
And then one final thing would be improvise 12th numbers. So they can take like a one high chord and then it becomes like little building blocks. And then like, you can start like increasing the difficulty, say change the register for at least one note of each trichord or
Right.
or order them in different ways. Because some students will start like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so just for the big LEDs this way, which is a great starting place actually. But, they're making it more complex.
I've never done as much as I wish I had with improvisation. Where I have used it is at the basic levels of oral skills, and we're stuck getting used to scale degree function. In group improvisations, where there's a clear framework, because then they can hear when they're not part of that framework. So if they're just sitting between the notes on a triad or something, you can hear when you're on 4 or 6 or something instead of those. And then adding passing tones and things like that. That's basically all I've done in the classroom. But one thing that I think about with regard to improvisation is there are lots of different possible reasons for doing it, and one is very goal-directed. I want them to learn about scale degree function, or I want them to understand baseline implications or something like that. But then another is just to get them working with materials in a more fluent way. And I've actually been kind of inspired by going to music therapy classes. And they just sit in a circle, everybody grabs some percussion instrument, and then someone starts making a noise, and then people add a noise. And because that is so non-goal directed, right, there's no concept that comes out of that. They're not going to notate it at the end, so it's not an oral skills thing. I haven't incorporated that into my class, but that seems valuable too.
Yeah, I'm wondering about that too. I mean, I think some balance of doing some of those, I think, is really great.
Yeah.
Because I think it can just free people up and have a sense of, oh, we're just kind of along the lines of doing the kind of YouTube videos that Danny is talking about, where sometimes you have another mode that is that you're interacting with. There's an exercise, I mean, the Jones and Shaftel oral skills and context, almost everything they have is very directed. They stuck in this one exercise, where I've seen it somewhere else, where you have one person in the class do some kind of exaggerated physical gesture and repeat that gesture again and again. And then someone else on their instrument does a musical version of that, right? And so that there's very much and then someone else does a different musical version of that. And so that then, you have this sense of responding musically to something. Obviously, that's not all of the oral skills, but that kind of thing.
That kind of thing seems like it should be in the curriculum somewhere, but at the same time, doesn't feel like it has to be in theory or oral skills classes. But then it doesn't really fit into ensembles. Who's going to take the time to do that when they could be rehearsing for their concert? And it's hard to know where does it fit in the curriculum.
Well, I think it's not. I mean, I think it's not bad in oral skills class, but it can also build group camaraderie.
Yeah.
There's a sense of, well, we're kind of having fun here.
I went on some of that with reading graphic scores,
Right.
and here's a weird line drawing, and with different letters at different points. It's okay, front kind of quarter, you guys do C. But it was like really good team building for like that large ensemble setting of, hey, it doesn't matter, but we still have to listen to one another, and we listen in a different way than you would if you were just playing minutes on stage.
The other thing is to be very creative. I mean, there's research on creativity, which I'm getting into right now, that shows that to be creative, you need a certain level of expertise already. And so I feel like it's hard for me to know where is the place where I can put that in. Like, I can't just ask my students on day one of oral skills to be creative with their, I mean, some of them will be, but some of them will not be so creative just because they need some ideas to start with. They need some material to be working with. So that's something we can think about.
But picks up well with what I've done, which is pretty limited to Gallant schemas in the context of a sentence. And so we were looking through that resource at the Flip 101, just kind of showing when I use text, when I use video, when I use graphics and stuff. But that pedagogically seemed to work pretty well after they had done some experience in theory with sentences and period structure and seeing a lot of musical models. Then we'd go to improvising them in oral skills. And so that would start with, I would give the basic idea and have them repeat the response. We do just the statement response. So I'd bring my guitar and play chords because I'm more fluid at that than keyboard, and I'd play 1-5 and say like, do, sol, mi, re, and they would sing. Yeah, most of them would get re, sol, fa, mi over the 5 to 1. And then like, oh, wait, we do know something. And so, because I think a lot of them think they know less than they do. And so to try to find things like that where it's really obvious where most of the students are going to have the same answer, or where the difference is actually a legitimate option. And so then we would deal with continuation phrases, and eventually they try to get to do a whole sentence improvised. Instead of a sight reading exam, they do an improv exam, and I play along with them. Yeah, but just taking those standard forms and schemas. So we list the schemas according to presentation schemas, continuation schemas, or credential schemas, and then we learn to plug them into each other in different ways and practice in different patterns.
Yeah, so I also use improvisation really in a limited way, predominantly for outer voice possibilities. Usually this is to reinforce schemas that they'll be known, just so that they can practice that, oh yes, this can recur in different ways, trying to get it to more more ingrained, more available, more readily available. On the oral skill side of things, I think improvisation is used more, and I think again it's more in context. So
I like to have my students improvise with certain materials and framework. So, Danny and Phil were saying, eight bar phrase with one harmony change, just 1, 5, 7. Maybe when they learn the subdominant, you go in 4, and I just have them start either singing. Well, actually, lately I've been doing it with instruments more of it. Just arpeggiating, just playing those chord members and then adding passing tones and neighbor tones. But I like to say things like you can only use up to 8 notes or no more than 4 notes in a measure, because otherwise they go crazy. And then for rhythm, I'll give them rhythmic cells, just like 1 beat patterns. I'll just string them together and make up your own pattern, and that's to get them to learn solos. That's usually spoken as well. The only problem that I ever encounter with instrument improvisation is keys. So for transposing instruments.
The other, I mean, if you're using a lot of what I'm envisioning partly is using improvisation combined with dictation and oral skills. So we'll call a lot of call and response, where I'm not only doing the call, but students are also doing the call. But if you're doing it on instruments, people can look at the fingerings, whatever the fingerings are. So they have to not look, or sometimes you can set up groups where they're back to back to do some of that. So that's something actually to think about.
Sometimes I'll play short patterns with the keyboard, and that's what I play with that. And I'll just say, do it in whatever key is comfortable, or at least I'll try to group them. Like I'll do all the B flat, B long, and I'll do all the C instruments.
Just a couple things I was going to say that I've had better experiences doing improvisation with a rhythmic backdrop. The free improvisation, I haven't really done much of that, but I've found it to be pretty successful if they've got a beat pattern going and they're all conducting. And one thing that seems to kind of build group camaraderie too is just to have, we're going to set up a certain key and you just go person by person and the first person, within the beat pattern does like 3 notes, and then we rest for a measure, and then the class, responds back, call and response, but each person gets a turn as the person making an improv, and even just simple, 3 pitch patterns. But I found it gets them just thinking more fluently within a key. And then I was also going to mention that someone had mentioned sometimes we do this to develop fluency. Maybe you were saying just to develop more fluency. A lot of first-year students, you find them even into their second semester, you'll say, what's scale 3/6 E flat? And they're still, to that point. And to get them to that next step of just, this is our set of diatonic pitches in flat major. This is what you have to work with. And if you can coordinate that with their class piano, because that can be a really nice visual tool where they do chord progressions and then improvise over E flat major and then over different chords. I've found helps to bridge that kind of gap and give them.
A little bit of work in this, mostly just kind of call and response rhythmic stuff, less melodically, unfortunately, than I would have liked. I've had them do some transcriptions, though, of improvisations to see what it is about. And so, Miles Davis, 5/5 solo, the first chorus through or something, which is very well crafted. I mean, it's a well crafted solo. He uses his extended chord tones, but the passing tones are used well, the neighbor tones are used well, and so it gives them, I think, in terms of the concept of improvisation, it gives them the idea that, it's not just free improvisation. Yeah, there's a craft to it. There are guidelines that I need to stick to. You mentioned having guidelines, right? There are guidelines that we need to stick to in order for this improvisation to work well.
Great. I was thinking about, since a few people mentioned call and response, we could try a little bit of that. I think just a few thoughts about it. in the past, I've usually done it a little bit, sounds like what Tim Chinette does in terms of just building skill to be awareness. But then, I mean, the key thing that I was thinking about is that the fact that I'm improvising, I'm making up on the spot is critical because I think, first of all, I kind of bring a certain intensity to it. But it also means I can gauge in the moment how complex to go based on their response. The thing I haven't done as much in, partly because I haven't been doing oral skills, so I'm not going to be doing that more, is had them lead the call and response. Because I think that's so first of all, there's a very first class is call and response where I'm giving solfege, they're responding solfege, just they're repeating what I do, and then you take away my solfege, but they still have to do solfege, right? So that goes, or scale degrees or whatever. But if they're doing the same thing, then they also have to do that gauging of how are the people in my group doing, and they can't do stuff that's too complex. They have to sort of, but then you can do that simple call and response to develop, any kind of range of skills, at least chords and so on. But then in relation to call and response, so there's a couple interesting ideas from Ed Serra. He has you do a call and response that's metric, and you do an idea, say it's a 1 bar idea in whatever meter you choose. Before the response, you do it again. So that means that your call has to be clear enough that you can do it again. And then the group responds and does it again. So there's this kind of sense of being important. That's a nice variation on the call and response thing. I haven't tried it, but I think we'll just work out differently. An idea that Nicole Brockman has, and again, you can try this, is I'm quite slow. I do yum, da, da, dum, you respond, da, da, dum, twice as fast. I do da, 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 dum, you do da, 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 dum, and it has to be right in time. So that's a kind of you have to do it twice as fast.
Augmentation on the phone.
Or diminution.
Yeah.
And then, or you could do that with, or you can do it with instruments, you could do it with or without solfege. So that's another kind of variant on the call and response version. So you're gonna.
Oh, I was just throwing another option I've done that's similar is I'll sing or play and then have them, so I'll do the call and then have them repeat the call, and if it's mostly right, then we go into response, and if not, it just falls apart. But then they're doing a little bit of that dictation recognition practice at the same time as well.
Yeah, for call and responses, even if you the variation of them, it's like that. It's like we keep in time the whole time.
Yeah.
I do a call, they echo the call, they give a response, and I echo the response.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of just cycle back and forth for
Yeah.
however long.
Yeah, and sometimes the going from solfege to no solfege, and then they respond with solfege, can feel a little testy to me, like test-like to me. So sometimes that's when I'll use my instrument. And so I'll switch from singing to instrument so that it's a real thing, and they have their instruments, so that's their like figuring out the fingering, which may or may not be solfege, but that they might actually have some facility there that they don't have a solfege that they can tap into. And so kind of that rotation, then we're just switching from one musical task to another, which does build in complexity, but it's not like, okay, now I'm going to test you on what we were just practicing.
When your students are doing this activity, how much do you engage them on some of the aesthetic issues like why would this response be more satisfying to the call than this other one? Do they get to that?
This is something where evaluating it, I haven't gotten to that level. I mean, because mostly what I've done is me improvising in order to build a certain awareness of a certain kind of structure.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if you're talking about antecedent consequent, then it's interesting because you can build the antecedent consequent exercise or activity in a variety of ways. You can just say, do an antecedent consequent. Do a question answer. Or you can say, Nicole Brockman says, do a phrase that starts on 1, ends on something other than 1, and respond. The respond starts on something other than 1, ends on 1. So that's more specific, but not as specific as you could be. Was there
Jonathan just said that he does call and response improv with classical phrase structure. So exactly that.
So there are some nice stuff.
Dave mentioned some food for
Yeah, he's got a lot of good rhythm vines.
Those are awesome.
Yeah, they're fun. They're definitely not Takadimi, but
They're better.
yeah, you want to play it?
we can plug them into the sound system. You want to do it?
Get your kids are plug, power, plug, pop. Get your kids are plug, power, plug, pop.
I don't know if that's pretty nice. Go on.
Get your kids are plug, power, plug, pop.
They never do that.
Mhm.
So maybe we should do it the other. Is that, I guess I was thinking we all have some experience with call and response. I was thinking maybe doing something else that's not call and response, and something that can start kind of completely open and move towards something more specific is an exercise where you start as a group and hum or sing a pitch of your choice that's preferably not the same pitch as the people around you. Since we're going to get a kind of massive sound. You can do this with your eyes closed so that you're a little less self-conscious if you want. And then I'll clap, and when I clap, what we want to do is gradually move towards something else that's either a single pitch or some kind of other sonority that we as a group decide we want to move towards. But not like just, you can take your time to ease into that sonority. Okay, so obviously staggered breathing, so you sing and then you take the breath when you're ready. Kind of hold your same pitch for a little while, so get used to the sonority. And then after about 15, 20 seconds or so, I'll clap, and then we'll move towards something else. That's so by group kind of consensus. Okay? So if you want to close your eyes, you can just start humming, or can be a hum or it can be on an ah. Right? So you have to listen. That is in you have to listen. So let's try now. We'll take this from this pitch, which ended up being now audiate either that pitch or the third or the fifth, and we'll just sing. You decide what pitch. So here I'm giving directions, but it's still improvisation if you're inside, and we'll see what kind of a major tone. And let's do it again, and that ended up being fairly balanced, but let's see if we can now listen again and get a kind of ideal balance between roots, third, and fifth. So you have to decide how we want to do them. We'll hold it for about 8 beats. 3, 4. We might be a little closer together, so can people hear each other? Let's try moving things so that we're actually closer together.
Oh, you're goodness.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm killing my students.
I'm gonna tweet here.
Hold on.
It's actually, the moving together is actually going to be important for the next year.
This is uncomfortable. I'm gonna shut down.
So what we're going to do this time, we're going to sing this. Let's do it. So we'll sing it for 4 beats, and then we'll take a rest for 2 beats, and then you have to take the pitch of the person on your left. So you have to be singing your pitch. You have to be hearing the pitch of the person on your left. sing the same thing again and listening. Let's try it on off this time rather than. How did that work? Is that being useful for you?
Well, it's interesting, when I started reading it over, I had to sing louder so he could hear me, and then bring it back so I could hear her.
I haven't done this before, so this would be an experiment. That's an obviously could do it with minor triad, with different qualities of triad. Or you could do it with people singing the solfege, then they could hear, they could both be aware of whether they're singing the root and they could listen to what vowel the other person is singing.
This is one of those games that is so easy to pass. Like if I didn't get this pitch, you can't hear what I'm doing, so he thinks I'm tough.
Which could be a benefit.
Well, sure.
And then it means like, oh, I made a mistake, but I can jump right back in. Like I know I missed that, but
Yeah.
I'm still playing.
Sure.
This actually reminds me of another thing that I've done, which is improvising voice leading, and you do something like that, and then you say, I'm gonna do a bass line, assume that my note is the root chord,
Right.
and move to something in that chord.
Right. And see what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another really nice. Do that for just a very introduction to voice leading, because then they say, look, your voice is going, where did you take your voice? Yeah. That's a nice thing.
You could also kind of adapt it to use different functions, you know, everybody needs to pick something that's a dominant function.
Yeah.
And then
Yes, and right, and so they do this in the Jones and Shapley oral skills and context. They start with tonic triad, and then they say, I'm going to do this pitch, but everyone audiate a pitch from a subdominant triad. Let's sing that, and then let's half pitch that way. So that's a nice one. We could, the other, a nice one that no one's mentioned is with drones. Where you take either, sometimes part of the class will do a drone, and I'll lead another part of the class, and then moving through pitches over the drone. What's useful here, I don't know good eye hand symbols, so that's useful for that.
So you mentioned tweeted a thing about that too. Trevor Quick has a use that drone exercises. Yes, Indigenous Institute.
Oh,
Yeah, I
okay.
think that was the article Megan was mentioning.
Okay, so that's good to know.
Yeah, both rhythmic and pitch.
Yeah, it's cool. That's nice.
Great. And so, put our hand symbols. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And if they start to learn this, we can have. Yeah, I don't know why I'm kind of drawn to the free rhythm stuff, because you can kind of sit with the pitch for a little while and kind of enjoy it.
Remember the scale, that's so fun. Like from text to student parents. Like when you're just like doing one like major scale. Yeah.
Right.
Like feel all these like unbalanced folds.
Right.
It's like beautiful.
Yeah.
And I can hear the pianists, the tuning of the knee.
Yeah.
The brass play on that area down here.
I definitely feel like I've done more of this type of stuff, especially as a student with my instrument in like applied and studio contexts.
Right.
I mean, for flute players, the big thing that we do is different stones. We'll do trios with two, and two players will play, and based on the interval that you're playing and the actual frequencies, then you'll hear the undertone underneath it. So then you can make it like a little trio, and it both builds good intonation doing that, but then you also get to do hearing. But we never did anything like that when I was a student in the oral skills. That was flute.
Yeah, I mean, and I've done a lot with this kind of thing, with singing in oral skills, but I haven't had yet students bring in their instruments and do that method. I think I really want to do that.
This last exercise actually reminded me of a time which I have used in improvisation class because I quite enjoyed it, and I think my students did as well. And what I did is I just drew like a scale of stemless quarter notes on the board. And I had somebody say, "Hey, who wants to lead?" And they just go up with a golden point, and the class would follow. So it's like the pointer was kind of the lead.
Yeah, so that's an alternative to the.
Yeah, and everybody really enjoyed it.
And that works well with those rhythmic cells that Bill was talking about. If you just have, they start to see how a quarter note can be in simple meter can be divided up with certain 8s and 16s, and then you just point, with a steady beat between different rhythmic cells, and they have to follow the pointer.
Right.
Yeah, that's good for training recognition of those too. Because I've done things where I can lay on a chart of like the 2-note divisions, the 3-note divisions, and I just had numbers and just call them out. They go back and forth and just like fuse them as single entities. And Dave just tweeted out his easily meaning. These are the words that the students came up with for the different things that are a little more interesting than the Takadimi or like the strong or Amsterdam. Like these waffles and turkey bake apples and bears, right? So it's everybody hungry first thing in the morning. And it's like it gets you eating a full breakfast before you come to class. So you're not too hungry. But another thing, having those things to kind of like anything that fuses it is a unit. And also the gaming plan, you can play bingo with rhythms. So you play them in a rhythmic strat. And like, but you don't give them like too much time. So like that. Whatever. So you're giving them different rhythms, but you don't give them too much time to be able to translate it for itself.
Yeah, and you can do that with form too. I'm trying to find it, and of course I can't find it on the spot. But there's a really old, you can teach fugue with rhythms, and it's like I am the subject, and then other people.
I'm talking that.
Yeah.
There's
Just-
a subject. You could have a counter subject.
Where's that from?
I'm trying to find.
music, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to find a PDF of it to share. This is being really slow, but I'll see if I can't find it. Upload that.
Another thing that occurs to me is something I've done with composition students, but not oral skills or theory students. But there's no reason why not. I'm very much into interdisciplinary work between artists, and I do a lot of work with dancers. And I'm having composition students work with a lot of dancers and improvise with dancers. Before you were talking about this like making a gesture. And I've done some of that with dancers. And so not only is it an interesting exercise to kind of read a gesture, which is something students in ensembles do all the time, but it also provides an opportunity to do things like start working with dancers to start to understand how they think about gesture in a fundamentally different way, and how a musician's embodiment of music is much different than the dancer's embodiment of music. And those disciplinary differences, I think, are very, very educational.
Although I know it's along the same lines, rhythmics kind of gets into that too, and there's always an element of improv with rhythmics and the feeling rhythm through motion. And instead of, and oftentimes if I have a student who's really struggling with with maintaining a beat, instead of thinking of beats as up and down, it's a circle, and you want to pass through the same part of the circle throughout the beat. So just this up and down stationary, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 is often easier for a student to feel than 1, 2. It's a little bit more dynamic, and then you can get people moving, and you get them, ask them to walk at a certain beat, and then improv something by clapping or tawing, and that falls within the beat, and that way you get them moving, and they have to think okay, well, I have to maintain this, but then I have to come up with something on top of it, and I can't lose what I'm already doing, or I'm gonna like bump into somebody, and it can be fun, but again, I've only ever done that as a student. I've never brought that into a class, which I thought was really.
Circles are very good relevant too. Different
Yeah.
Pretty sure basic first or second semester theory class could do the first few cells within C.
Yeah.
Pretty good. Well, just
And they, and they can always stop and listen.
that's right.
Yeah, that's a piece that I would. It's just a lot of those sort of modular eccentric pieces.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, I think Chesky maybe, there's a piece where you have, it's like a game, and you have someone with like all these colored cards and stuff, and you hold it up, and then everybody's sitting there with their instruments. Well, you know, that is a cue to a certain thing or a certain type of improv. And then you can, you know, they change the cards as it goes, but then the people who are improving can be like, you can have different hand gestures, and you can be like, no, we're going to do this instead. You can break away from the person with the rules set. And it's cool. I mean, it's an actual piece of music.
Can you add in C to whoever it's next? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can add a note about the article. Is it covered?
Yeah, Dave tweeted that earlier.
Is that on a document of notes? A nice one that, you know, I was just thinking about how to bring it back also to oral skills and to transcription. You know, if you do one thing that could be useful is to do a call, response, and write. Right? So that they have the time to have to use it, whether with the instruments or with other instruments. And in terms of combining rhythm and pitch, a nice one that Nicole Brockman has is you play a scale, and you can obviously work through the keys over time, where you have to rhythmicize the scale within a certain tempo span, say 2 bars or 4. That's the call. The response, someone else does the same thing, matches your rhythm with the same scale, while you do the same scale going down in the same rhythm. Okay? So you dum, 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 da, 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 dum. I would then do you start from bottom and I say, yeah, so then your rhythm has to match, right? And you have to think about how you're going to fill out those 2 bars. You have to be thinking in time while you're doing that. And playing it on. So that's a kind of improvisation where you're having to do a lot of thinking.
Yeah, one thing we've done related to transcription, which isn't so, I don't know if it's really improvisation, but as they do the transcriptions, having them alternate sight reading and then listening, comparing, and then listening, transcribing, and then putting it in. And then sometimes, like with a band, the song "Aha" "Take on Me," I always tell my students that they sing with a rhythmic accent because they're Danish, and the rhythm doesn't really sound right for English. And part of the issue is that in the second verse, the rhythm is very different because the stress is different. And that there's an interference effect where you try to fit it to the rhythm in the first verse. But then also, if you were just to look at the words and improvise a rhythm to it, it would be probably very different for a native English speaker than for and so that could be another exercise that you improvise based on the words, given this first verse. The meter is different. What's the melody going to sound like? You're going to be very structured. And improvisation that can then be predicted for transcription. I haven't done that element yet, but some of the others really into that, but really useful.
Something that has been much better, but I don't think it's been discussed is a lot of creation as well. And it's problems versus that's so much fun.
So is that when you're doing some improvisation, is that the material you're working with?
Yeah, we talk about the canonical stuff. I've done that in my canonical classes. The freshmen though, with our first species, we'll start with like, you have 4 notes, and we teach someone this species canonical, and we're assuming it's in the middle of the exercise, so we don't need to worry about the 4 notes. And you just start with something very simple, 4 notes, and you do it above. And then we get the concept. So we look at it for a second, we come up with something to apply. And then we extend that to one.
So and one person at a time is improvising.
They'll do it in pairs. So
I see.
We'll write down a bunch of solfeggio.
And then they're just in different parts of the room?
Yeah.
they're getting together and they're trying out different things. Right. Yeah, that's great.
And then we, for their first individual assessment, we come in and do
We're almost out of the hour. I guess there was one thing that we didn't talk about at all here is, was my fourth question was whether there's any kinds of research that we might want to pursue to evaluate what this is, how this is affecting development.
Well, one thing I've been reading lately in that book, Make It Stick, I think I mentioned that in a small group. It's a multi-authored work. It's coming out of study on it's called Make It Stick, the Science of Successful Learning. And one of the big things they keep hammering away is that repeated exposure does not lead to deep, long-lasting memorization, even let alone understanding. And so I wonder if a good study for this could be one section is doing a lot of repetitions of stuff that they're reading. That's easy to read, gets progressively harder. That involves these things, and another one is doing an improvised-based model, so the same elements are being interleaved at the same time. But one is doing repeated exposure to models, and the other is doing the creative activity.
So the alternative to repetition is some kind of active engagement. Is that the idea? Or
Yeah, well, I'm thinking the control for an improvisation.
Right.
Just,
right. But how do they present the alternative to repetition?
Oh, in their book, they anything that requires hard-working memory work. So it could be practicing recall, which this improvisation would be because you're doing it on the fly, and mixing up the things that you're looking at. So not doing massive practice of like here's a whole bunch of Jupyter schemas in a row, here's a whole bunch of Meyer schemas in a row, but mixing them up so that you essentially interrupt forgetting. Is the idea. So right when you're about to forget something, you engage it again, but you have to recall it as opposed to just recognize it. And I think improvisation folds in a lot of those things. So it's the kind of thing to say, your hypothesis is, this research looks a lot like improvisation and oral skills in specific ways, and you can test, mass practice versus mixed practice, and repeated exposure with repeated recall and a creative impact.
But we need some kind of way to measure the outcome, to compare the two groups.
Yeah, and
So
it seems like it would be hard to actually, I wouldn't know that I'd want to do this with a control group, because,
You believe in one pedagogy. You're just
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, that's really, Eric Mazur has tested peer instruction early on against colleagues who were skeptical,
Yeah.
who really believed in the lecture, homework, quiz, test model, and they both gave it their all in their own pedagogy, and then had their students take the forced concept inventory at the beginning of the semester, and we one at a time, quite handily. But it took, two people who were skilled and experienced who really believed in these different things.
There's a related question coming into performance is whether either the students or their teachers or other people listening to them have a sense that they have a more kind of integrated sense of phrasing and they own music, ownership over the music they're performing from having experience improvising. I think people who improvise kind of feel it that way, but I don't know if there's a way to test that.
I wanted to just go back and highlight something you said before, which is an improvisation activity requires thinking as a second. But I think that one of the values of doing improvisation is it allows you to differentiate two types of thinking. There's the students who will try to calculate in their head, right? Like these values are half and squares. It'll all line up in the end, but then they fail miserably. Versus not calculating, just like learning how to feel in time,
right.
Think in time. So like, wait, it's musical thinking. Right. And so for me, that goes essentially. An interesting process is how well does improvisation allow students to be able to think, anticipate in time.
In different levels of time, you could have like a long-term strategy and short-term tactics.
Yeah, exactly.
For different types of activities.
Which then could be kind of specifically how harmony is often taught. Here's your concept, here's your model, which is in a sense very atypical, distinct from what musical experience really is.
You also said something that I think is really important and I think should be overlooked, which is you talked about the students taking ownership of the music, and I mean that is an important skill, and I think that that's something that could be
sensed by the assessor.
Right.
It's like, how much more confident are you performing, doing this than you were before? And that's something that can be measured. And for a practicing musician, sometimes that's what makes it great. So confidence in leadership.
Which is, I think, where we can get over some of the stylistic prejudice bumps, because it's like, oh, well, Beethoven is really not my guy. Or Thelonious Monk is not, he's not my guy. But like, even if it's jazz, and I'm not a jazz person, if I'm doing jazz, if it's my jazz, like I'm gonna have a little more investment in it than if it's this other guy's jazz. I don't really care about jazz or that other guy. I mean, I'm not super into jazz. It isn't my thing, but I'm not. It's just an example.
It's boring, but some people like it.
Some people only listen to music drunk. No. You already did that out. No, but I think there's something to be said for having the students' music making be the center, and even if it's in the style of someone else, it's still their own, in a way that that other dead person's music is. I do. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say that integrating improvisation into the classroom is a kind of an all-in thing. Like every day, we're gonna be doing something. If we can have that mapped out, we can have that thought up for every single day. So they know that it's improv day, and
Yeah, and I was thinking about how I was going to introduce it this time, and I thought I actually wouldn't in particular. I thought we would just start doing it.
Just start doing
Yeah.
it.
Some people hear improvisation,
Right.
Yeah.
but.
Yeah.
That was the best part about it for first year music students, because they didn't know that.
Right.
Like, you're gonna be improvising species counterpoint, you're gonna do that, and I was just like, okay, I guess that's what you do in college.
Yeah, that's the advantage of having Theory 1 at 8 a.m. It's like the first college class is, what I say.
Although my flute teacher got our flute studio improvising as a way to kind of lessen some anxiety when performing. And she approached it, since we had a lot of undergraduates who were like really nervous about the whole idea and had some anxiety issues. She approached it with humor. She was like, I want you to make funny sounds on your flute, and we're going to improvise. And whatever one person does, if someone does like a funny little riff or make some kind of joke on their flute, like you've got to pick up. You've got to like do the next punchline. And she made it by using humor to kind of lessen and lowered the bar. So it's like, okay, I could just make like a stupid sound, and that's the goal. And then once people started loosening up, then it was okay, now just let's do regular pitches, but keep the humor, and then people had to be more creative with it. But it worked well, and I feel like you could do that to a certain extent, just to bring humor into it.
Just one other quick thought, which is that I know a lot of our colleagues in music education are doing more and more improvisation.
Right.
This might be also an area where we could foster collaboration.
So that's a great idea. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, let's think we're gonna have about 5 minutes before the next session. Do you want to take a break?
Sure. Do you want to take a few more? Because we just had one more session.
Yeah, that's right.
So
why don't I take 10 minutes and then come back 15?
Yeah, because I think the website and budget is till 5. And so if we can, we'll still be in here.
What is the next section?
The next session is going to be
careers
for music groups.
I had memorized.
Yeah, there is still coffee. The half and half is in the fridge. So I can grab that.